Okay, so we might start off with Phil. Hopefully no one rings your doorbell, Phil. So Phil, maybe just a quick introduction, a little bit of your background, what you're doing these days, and maybe what people might like to ask you about. You know.
Oh, no, thanks, Matt. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm based over in New Zealand, and I actually run the local Wellington user group. Have done. We're coming up our 5-year anniversary, which is probably still younger than you guys. But I do feel lucky because we only had to hold 3 virtual user group meetings. So for the last 10 months or so, we still have been going into the local Microsoft office and meeting face to face. So I do feel very lucky and privileged to be able to do that. And you know, it'll be great for you guys to be able to do the same thing. Outside of that, you know, I've been doing Microsoft BI for as long as I can remember. You know, for the last 2 years, I've been fortunate enough to be involved on the Power BI team, even though I'm based down here in the down under. You know, I work very closely with the Power BI team. My particular speciality is probably mostly around the DAX and data modeling side of things. So, you know, if you've got some interesting questions there, try not to make them too dry, because this should be a fun session. You know, DAX can be quite hard work, as everyone probably knows. But yeah, no, my strengths are definitely not data visuals or designing beautiful reports. I'm very lucky on the team that I work for. We have people that are amazing at that. So, you know, sometimes in my presentations, I show the before or the effort that I put on a visual design, and then I show the after, which is done by other people who've just got a great eye for it. So, yeah, if you want to flick me some questions on DAX and data modeling, or perhaps what it's like to work on the Power BI team for Microsoft, you know, please, it'll be really nice to see those questions.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Phil. And Daniel, I think some people will certainly know you. You've presented at our user group on a few occasions and you're a local, but maybe just a brief intro of your background and what you're doing these days and your areas of specialty.
Yep, I've been using Power BI since it became generally available, which was 2015, I think. It's going to be 6 years this year. I am the author of the official exam reference books, and the next one, DA 100, is coming in May, finally, I hope. I don't think I have the area of specialization, really, but I quite like DAX as well. And I'm okay with Power Query too. Last year, I became an MVP for some reason. I don't know. I just am a big fan of Power BI. Follow me on Twitter if you're interested in new features coming out, because I usually post about them.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, that's fine. And Daniel's being modest. He's very good at Power Query as well, and he's excellent at DAX. And when I get stuck with DAX, I send my questions to Daniel because he'll be able to sort it out. And Phil, obviously, is also very talented in DAX.
Thanks, Matt.
So, Iman, I said we'll sort of skip over, but Iman, your experience, you've got a really good knowledge of the stack of the ecosystem touch points, right?
Well, when compared to you guys, no, but yes, I can say that I've been doing BI for past 17 plus years, since beginning of SQL 2005, you know, the on-prem, and now with Azure Data Platform, Power BI, and, you know, doing end-to-end BI and analytics. So yeah, I can hopefully answer some of those questions that are related to large-scale implementation of Power BI and things around maybe licensing, security, governance, and things like that.
Yep. Okay, great. And as I said, most of you know me, but I'm also a DAX and Power Query guy. I'm a little bit different to Phil. Phil comes from a SQL background, so very good structured thinking about tables and relationships and those sorts of things that SQL people do really well. I don't have that same background. I have a much more of a migration from Excel focus. And so, you know, really I'm carving my specialty in helping people who are coming from that background to make the journey over to Power BI. But, you know, there's so many different ways that you can, different levels that you can come to with DAX and Power Query and how you can apply your knowledge. And so everyone's different. And it's good to have some different perspectives on this. So, okay, so let's get into to some of the questions now. So just for those people that have joined recently, so there is a QR code there. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to keep that up on the screen, but hopefully maybe, Iman, if I could ask you, could you just put into the chat message for me so I can concentrate on something else, just the link. You might actually be able to put a direct link to with the code embedded to the Pigeonhole website, so that if anyone joins, they can see in the chat message the link. Okay, so I'm going to try now to bring up the projector panel, and actually there it is there. So I do have the link here on this screen, and so I've got a few questions here that have come in. You can vote on these questions as well. So if you vote on the questions, they'll sort of float to the top of the list, and you should also be able to see the other questions that other people have asked. So I'm just going to start off. I think I can. So I'm just going to talk about this one. So just a comment from Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. Obviously looking forward to getting back face to face as well. So so yeah, we agree with you. And besides, we want Iman to buy some pizzas for us. So yeah, well,
yes, sure.
Sounds like it's not going to happen in April, but hopefully in May. All right, so maybe a good one to start off with would be one for Daniil, which is, can you tell us more about the A100? So Daniil, it might be good just to talk briefly about your book and yeah, how's DA100 different to the previous exam? And Iman, can you just put your and anything else? I mean, you're the expert. I haven't done the exam, so I certainly can't comment. So over to you, Daniil.
Okay. So this is a replacement exam. It supersedes with the 70778, the first Power BI exam. Now they have changed the exam quite a bit. While there is some overlap, I think maybe, I don't know, like 50%, there is still a lot that is covered that is new, just because, as I'm sure you're all aware, Power BI changes very frequently. Like every month there are new things coming out. And while the exam doesn't test on preview features, it still tests on generally available things. And there have been lots of additions over the past couple of years since the first exam came out. So if you're looking to prepare, like I said, my book is going to be out in May. There are 5 sections in there. So the exam tests on a wide variety of topics related to Power BI. Some things have been removed compared to the first exam. For example, I don't think they test on Power BI report server anymore. As far as I'm aware, that's not a core product, or that's how Microsoft puts it. I might be wrong. That's what I read some time ago. So anyway, yeah, things like even incremental refresh, aggregation groups, aggregation tables, they're all tested in the exam. So it's quite comprehensive. I would say it's a nice exam to verify your skills. I don't know whether companies require it, but certainly if you can pass it, that means you have quite a good knowledge of Power BI in general. So it tests Power Query, DAX, and Power BI service, and visualization, analysis, all that kind of stuff. If you have some like specific questions like the format, I forget how long it takes, but it's like most Microsoft exams. So you have different question types, like you have multiple choice, or sometimes you need to drag and drop fields. Sometimes you have like, I forget what they're called, like stories. So you have case study, and you're asked few things about that, like if that's the right solution, or what would you propose, all that stuff. Yeah, early May, my book is coming out, so read it and you'll prepare for the exam. And maybe there's going to be a video course. I hope there's going to be one.
Yeah, I've heard that. Okay, very, very good. All right, thanks, Daniil. And you said it was $160 to sit for the exam?
Oh, yes. The exam itself is $160 unless you get some kind of a voucher. I think students also get discounts somehow through Microsoft. Might be wrong though. But yeah, 160 US.
Okay.
Right, I have heard some organizations actually use the DA 100 exam to pass out pro licenses, so they won't let people author Power BI until they have passed the exam.
That's
interesting. And then they say, okay, now you are obviously at a level that you can start producing content for my org, and it shows that you've obviously can demonstrate a minimum level. So I thought that was an interesting idea when I saw that. Some orgs are doing it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend and say it suits every org, but some food for thought.
Yeah, it's interesting, and people have often asked me whether they think it's worth doing these certifications, Microsoft official certifications, and there's definitely some companies that do value it. I mean, the approach that I've always taken is that you either know it or you don't. And if I was interviewing someone for DAX, I could ask them some pretty specific DAX questions, and I would know if they know what they're talking about or not. So I think number one is you've got to know it, right? The exam it's almost like proof that you know it, and it's quick proof without having to sit through an exam. So, for $160, maybe it's a good investment, and it might even flush out what you don't know. But that's where I think Daniil's book comes in, and this video course, if he produces it ever, then then you'll be able to use those tools to learn as well. Okay, so great, thanks, Daniil. So I'm going to throw this one over to Phil. So this question here, Phil, can you just talk a little bit about the MS Power BI team? So I'm assuming this is the broader team. I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it. So of course, just tell us if you're not allowed to talk about stuff.
Sure, no problem. I don't actually know. Because the team itself is made up of lots of smaller groups. There are the people involved in the engineering, the testing, the developing. There's the PMs. There's the visible front end. I work on a small team called the CAT team, which seems to have about sort of 15 to 18 people. We're growing all the time. So my really rough estimate would be probably 350 to 400 people.
Wow.
Could be on the light side. There are some teams that do work for Power BI and other teams as well. So, for example, the DI team, which probably did spin up originally as a dedicated Power BI team itself, obviously does a lot more work for things like the Power Platform and probably other areas too. And they're expanding. If you watch any of Arun's sessions at Ignite conferences or MBAS conferences, what he usually does is present a chart showing the usage growth for Power BI, and it's just going up in a really, really strong way, and still continues to continue unabated. So our internal finance people expect us to probably double or treble in size in the next few years. There's nothing in all the metrics that we're exposed to probably suggest anything otherwise. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we have to, nearly double the number of people we get. And you probably see on Twitter and LinkedIn occasionally some of our PMs saying, "Hey, come and work for Power BI and be a PM." And I'm a good example that you don't have to move to Seattle to be involved in Power BI. And I think all the fun and games of last year and remote working in teams has probably shown even big US corporations like Microsoft that you can successfully get people working around the world on applications like this, and it's just getting easier and easier, and often better and better because you get all the different perspectives and So back to the original question, my guess is probably about 300, 400. I could be short by about 100. I don't know, but
okay. Certainly more than I thought it would be, and I had no idea. And but just one observation here. I mean, another question that people often ask me is, or they'll make a statement along the lines of, how many features are only available in premium, and Microsoft, they're always trying to get extra money. But if you were just to do a back of the envelope, 150 grand a year per person times 350 people, that's $52 million a year. So it's not unreasonable that Microsoft would be looking to make a return from that massive investment year on year.
And the hardware.
Yeah.
You know, because all this is running on servers and data centers. You know, we have to buy those, and we have to rent those. And you know, I think what we have to do is make sure we guarantee we have a minimum number of machines available to the Sydney data center or the Melbourne data center in case people want to spin things up. So you know, we need to reserve that capacity and pay for that capacity internally. And you know, these are not small bills.
Yeah. So the dev and maintenance alone has got to be 100 million plus a year. So you know, it's a significant investment, and that's part of the reason why it's doing so well, right? I mean, it's doing well because it's a good product as well. But you know, all of these things play a part. Okay, great. Thanks, Phil. So I think this one might be something that you might be able to answer, Iman. Just tell me if you don't feel comfortable with it, but.
I can answer to the level that I know, and then probably rest of that can be filled. So from my understanding, the embedded capacities, like A capacities, I'm talking about just A, not EM. A capacities can, they are charged hourly, whereas P capacities are monthly, and normally you have a commitment to pay that for the whole year or annual commitment. So A1, A2, A3 are exactly same as EM1, EM2, EM3, etc., except that EM capacities are mostly for internal use. A capacities are for ISVs or companies who build it as embedded to their application, and they can only pay per hour, and they can go up and down. Whereas in EM capacity, you have to pay monthly. Even if you turn it on and off, you know, you still pay the same bill. And it can be used for internal use as well as embedding. So maybe Phil, you can correct me, because that's the gray area that I keep getting this from different clients. They want to change from EM to A capacities for internal use. I know that Microsoft doesn't recommend, but I haven't seen this in a very clear. I know that Matt, you have a good blog on that, but I get these mixed messages even from Microsoft account managers that sometimes they recommend to a client that you can go to A capacity for some internal use, whereas what we hear from other people is that they have to go to embedded like EM capacities or P capacities.
I do have a slight update on this as well. So yeah, this is one of my passions. So as Iman said, there's premium, so P1, P2, P3. There's what we call Azure embedded, so A1, A2, A3. And then there's the embedded capacities, which we call EM1, EM2, EM3. And so, yeah, so the gray area seems to be on these A SKUs. And the reason everyone wants them is because you can start and stop them. You can't start and stop EM, as Iman said, and you can't start and stop the premium capacities, but you can start and stop the A SKUs. And so there's a lot of interest in the A SKUs because if you think about it, it's a potential money saver. But if you think about it from Microsoft's perspective, they've got the asset sitting there idle. But anyway, that's a whole bigger conversation. Now, I've been advised by Casper de Jong, who's in the same team as Phil, that the A SKUs are not licensed for internal use. They're only licensed for external use. So you need to buy it and then use it for a customer of yours. However, I have made 4 requests for the license agreement for the A SKUs so that I can see it in writing. And so far, Microsoft hasn't been able to produce a license agreement for me. So in the absence of a license agreement, all you can do is go and have a look at the online documentation. And I can tell you it's inconsistent. Some of the documentation suggests you can use it internally. Some suggest you can't. And so my personal approach for my personal use, I'm not telling anyone else what to do. I would use good faith and I would use it. And when I see a license document that tells me that's incorrect, then I'll be happy to stop. The other thing, if I can just throw in a self plug here, is that if you would like to use an A SKU through a third party, I can help you do that. And so I actually have a service where I can configure an A SKU and be a supplier to you. You can use it legally within your tenant. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to me. And I'll configure it and offer it to you back as a service for a fee. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to know more about that. Phil, did you want to add anything to any of that unofficial stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I hear the conversation. I don't really dive down into it as deeply as Casper. I know that he, makes it very clear what his interpretation of the rules are, and I think it's something that is not technically enforced. And I do see conversations pop up from time to time, like, should it be technically enforced, yes or no? So at some point in time, that may happen. I'm not close enough to know, but I would suggest, it sounds like Matt's approach is very pragmatic and sensible, but I wouldn't build tons and tons of reliance on it just in case one morning it stops working. I don't expect that to happen anytime soon, but that would probably be my 2 cents worth. I think it's a great way to learn the product, because you can pause it and learn a very important skill set cheaply. So, personally, I think it should be available.
And of course, the other thing you can use now is premium per user, pro per user, PPU. And so if that's actually probably a cheaper way to do testing in a premium environment now. So I think where a lot of people maybe were using the ASCII before, maybe PPU is a more cost-effective way for them to do that testing now. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops. All right, so look, we've got a few votes starting to come in now. So let's have a look at this one here. So do you have some chart tips or hacks? So with the anonymous, we can't really ask any questions for clarification on that, but so this is, I'm assuming this is specifically around charting. So line charts, column charts. I mean, my interpretation, your interpretation might be the same. Anyone, can I throw it open to the floor? Does anyone have any comments around this one?
I've got one that might be of interest to some people, and I did say in my intro that I'm the last person to talk about data viz, but I know that a lot of the Microsoft native visuals share a common code base. So the bar chart and the stack chart and the line chart, they're actually what are known as the Cartesian charts. Now, when you click on one, you get exposed to a certain number of properties and formatting tools. But then when you click on another one, it might change. So sometimes when you're frustrated that you go to a pie chart and you're not happy that you don't have a formatting option on a particular label, one trick is that you can go to set your visual to be something else, like a bar chart, set the property, and then change your visual type. And sometimes what you find is that property gets extended through. And the reason for this is simply because we haven't built the UI. So the underlying engine can technically support this ability to set a certain property on a visual. We just haven't caught up the UI. So I know that some of our data visual people will start building a chart with the intention of being visual A, but they'll set it to be visual B, set the properties, etc. Then at the last minute, flick it back to visual A, and the properties come through. So a bit of a hack and a tip. I'm not sure if that fits into the bucket that the person was asking, but that's my suggestion.
So these cards, Phil, is what you're talking about. So when these cards, so different visuals have different cards depending on what objects they have available, and sometimes swapping between them, make a change and then swap back, and you actually inherit that setting even though it's not there in the UI. That's what
persists. Yeah, not all visuals, like obviously things that are radically different, like map or the R visual or Python visual, etc. They are quite different visuals under the covers. But I think quite a few of the Microsoft native visuals are using a very common shared code base, so the properties do work across them. So have a bit of an experiment and play if that's useful.
Thanks, Phil.
But that's me. I'm going to run and get some more wine now, so be right back.
My tip on charts is that all charts, all visuals inside Power BI, by default will hide any values that have a blank, right? So by default, if there's no sales against the subcategory, it gets hidden. And so you can come here into the field section. Now you need to come into the bit on the rows, or in this case, it's the data. Click on this drop-down arrow and you can say show items with no data. And then you'll get the full list of values, so it doesn't hide the ones that have a blank. Now, there's a valid use case for hiding the blanks. That's the default, but there's also a valid use case to seeing the values that haven't, or seeing the items that have no value. So you can do that in a matrix, but it also works in these other charts. So in any of these other charts, by default, they hide the values or the items with no values. And that same setting is available here. So if you're ever trying to see the blanks and zeros are treated essentially the same in the DAX language. They will both evaluate to 0, but a blank will be hidden by default and a 0 will be shown by default. And so there's a little setting there. So it's, anyway, just something that I thought of. Daniel, Iman, any little tips or hacks on charts?
Iman?
Yeah. Okay, so my tip, it's not really like a big complicated tip. It's just based on my observation in the past few weeks that I did some assessment for clients, and I see that people tend to use a lot of custom visuals. And as you know, in many cases, custom visuals are not, good idea, especially for performance, and if they are not certified. So if you have to go with custom visual, at least go with the ones that are certified. And if you don't use them, remove them from PBIX file that you have. And you can see which one of them are used in Power BI desktop that you're using. And what I find is that sometimes people create a template in the organization and they reuse that, which can have a lot of embedded custom visuals in that page. So maybe just use it only if you need.
Okay, very good.
I might have something.
Okay.
A hack. I need to show it though. So I don't know. Should I request control, or can you create a couple of measures?
Let me. You can. Hang on. I gotta go. So see whether you can share your screen now. Oops.
I'm
going to stop sharing and then just let go of your mouse because I think you've got control on it. Okay, so try sharing your screen now.
I don't have a Power BI desktop.
Oh. So
look, it's kind of simple. I can
all right.
Maybe just let you know what you have to do in Power BI desktop, but it is a hack, and I hope that it still works. So can you create some text measure? Any measure?
A test
just as long as it returns text.
Okay, I've probably got, okay.
If you already have one, that's good.
That's all right. So I'll create a test measure that returns text.
Yeah, just some text.
Like that?
Yeah, great. Now,
I've already got a test. Test. Okay.
Yeah, great. Now let's add that to a multi-row card. And also let's add a couple of numeric measures.
Okay, so it's a bit small, but I'll go up a little bit bigger so you can see it. And a couple of text measures into the multi-row.
Numeric measures. Yeah. So, okay, this is as expected. Now you see the measure that is text became a special title. It's not a visual title. Like if you add a title to this visual, it's going to be another title. So that's one thing, but that's as expected, right? Now, what if you don't want it? What if you want this text to appear alongside all the numeric measures, right? Then you create a measure, like a new measure.
Okay, another one.
Another one, yes. Now it should be if true. Yes, and then test Daniil.
Sorry, like this?
No, reference my measure, the previous one,
okay.
test.
Okay. Okay.
No, you should reference my measure.
I got it. I'm just a bit slow, yeah?
Yeah, otherwise say 1. Yep,
it's always
okay, let's try this measure. Yeah, let's try this. I hope I don't fail.
There you go, look at that.
Yeah, now if you get rid of my other measure, which is test Daniil, I think it's still gonna work. Yeah, and you might be surprised. Why does it work? Well, that's because the new measure returns a data type that is variant. Like in theory, it can be different. It can be either text or it can be a number. Like obviously I set it up in such a way that it will never be a 1, but still Power BI gets strict and it thinks that it might be text or a number. Okay, so that's a hack.
That's a very good hack. I've never actually tried to put a text measure in I don't use a lot of multi-cards, but nice tip. All right, very good. So hopefully whoever asked that question, that's answered some for you. So let's have a look again. So 4 votes, so we'll go with the numbers. So let me see if I can find this one here. So let's have a look at this question. When do you find yourself? I'm not sure who's the best person to answer this. I'm not big on data flows, so I'm not probably the best person to answer.
I can say a couple of things from my side, but I'm sure Bill and Dan can add to that. So obviously, data flow gives you a lot of flexibilities if you want to add building blocks of your data model, like maybe common dimensions and different components that you can reuse them in multiple data sets. But there are some limitations in data flow, like as you probably know, if you have Power BI Pro license, you cannot do incremental refreshing data flow. You need to have premium license. There are some limitations in the duration that it can get for each table and data set. I believe that's 2 hours and 3 hours in Pro, that after that you get timeouts. And there was another limitation that I noticed, that only data flow owner can go and change it. So that's a bit difficult if you have multiple developers. They need to keep changing the ownership before they make any changes, and that's not good because it can also change the credential and those things, and also the ID, which every time that you make changes, I believe the ID changes. So yeah, there are only few limitations that I noticed, but normally I tend to go with data flow for scalability and more control, so you can have flexibility of when to refresh what data and getting the size that you want in your staging environment in your data flow.
Yeah. So if I can just extend on that in a couple of areas, Iman. So, and I think you alluded to this in your last statement. But so one of the benefits of data flows is that you can control the frequency of refresh of your tables, right? So you could have your calendar table refreshing once a month or once a day, but you could have your sales table refreshing 8 times a day. And it takes the load off of your data set by pushing it into data flows. So that's one of the benefits. There was something else that I thought of, but I can't. Doesn't come to me now. All right. So, and how do you handle relative date quarter date filtering? I don't know. I've never actually done that. Has anyone actually done? So let's have a look at the relative filtering. So if I put a date column into a page level filter, then I can come in here, I can change it to relative date filtering. And so I can come in here and I've got these options. I don't have quarter as an option, but I'm assuming I could go months, and I could say in the last 3 months and apply that filter. Now, the data I've got here is AdventureWorks, and the data is 2004. So I can't actually show that in use, but I'm assuming that you could use it if you were looking to do quarter-based filtering. You could do 3 months, and that would work. And also, someone else might know better than me, but this months and calendar months. So I think the calendar months is completed months. So if we're in the middle of March, it would be the last 3 months would be all of December, all of January, all of February. That's my understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong there. And then, yeah, the months will actually basically just go back, I think, to the 17th of March, go back 3 months. That's my understanding. So I think that's what that question was. How do you do relative date filtering?
Matt, I think for quarters, they may have meant actual quarters without shifting every month, because if you select last 3 months, then every month is going to shift.
Yes, that's right. So, what I said was a rolling 3 month, which is different to a quarter.
Yeah. In that case, maybe you could build a relative column. It doesn't matter if it's Power Query or in calculated column, like a relative one, and it would use, say, either to date or date time, local now or something.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing is that once you use Power BI service, you are evaluating today in UTC, right?
Yep.
Not in like Sydney time zone. So you've got to take care of that. There is a DAX function called UTC today, or UTC now, that will evaluate UTC, and then you can add, say, 10 hours or something. Actually, for one customer, I created a measure that calculated whether the time offset should be 10 hours or 11 hours for Sydney. Maybe other people have done that as well. Maybe there's a better way. Actually, some people suggest. What's that?
I'm sure you charged a lot for that formula.
Yes, I did. Yes. But some people suggest an API. So you can do that as well.
Yeah.
So a relative quarter, like 0, -1, -2 would be a good solution here, I think.
Sure. So this is AdventureWorks. In this AdventureWorks database, we have a quarter column. And so this column 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it resets 1, 2, 3, 4 for the second year and the third year. I always recommend, for good time intelligence purposes, that you always have an index column. So I don't know what's happened there. Where did so I have this this month ID column here. So this starts 1 for the first month, 2 for the second month. But importantly, after the 12th month, it keeps going, 13, 14, 15, and so on. So I say anytime you want to do time intelligence over a particular time period, always create one of these ID columns. And so in the case of doing the last quarter, I would create a quarter ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, but then it doesn't reset 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what that means is you can write your custom time intelligence functions. You can detect which quarter am I currently in. So I'm currently in quarter 13. And then it's very easy to write a formula that says, okay, if I'm in quarter 13, give me the sales from the previous quarter, which is obviously quarter 13 -1. So you can just do very simple integer manipulation using manual time intelligence functions to do that. And so that would be my tip for that one. Phil, anything different from you, from the stuff that you've done around the place?
No, I know that time zones are a challenge, especially when you are using that relative date slicer to do things like show me the last couple of days or whichever, because the data is all treated as UTC once you publish it to the service, even though you might be in Sydney or Singapore or wherever.
Yeah.
And being here over in Australia and New Zealand, it's especially obvious when you look at a report using one of these slices in the morning and you see numbers, and then you come back at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or for you guys, 11 o'clock in the morning, and they change. And you need, there are ways to solve it, but they're not necessarily trivial ways to solve it.
Yeah. So one limitation regarding this time zone question. So in the case of AdventureWorks, if I went to the sales table, I don't have time, but you could store the time of the transaction in the sales table in UTC. If you do have date time, it's always recommended to separate your date and your time into 2 separate columns for performance reasons. So imagine you had a UTC transactional time column, and then you could write a measure. So the other thing that you could do, I don't have a user table, but I've got a customer table, which could be a simulation. If you had a user table, you could add a column to the user table that had their UTC offset, right? So Phil would be plus 12, is it, Phil? And I would be plus 10 or something like that. And then you could write a measure that extracts the time from your transaction table and adds the UTC offset to give the time of the transaction. But you would have to do that as a measure. You couldn't do that formula as a calculated column on a per user basis unless you replicated the data for every time zone in the world, which is actually a possibility. I mean, Power BI can load a lot of data. So anyway, there's a lot in that question. So thank you for that question. So let's move on to what have we got here. So what's the preferred method? So let me come back, try and find. Can't find the, oh, I see. I have to refresh my list. This one here. So what's the preferred method of accessing data in Power BI for Oracle as a data source? So this one might be for Iman or Phil. I don't know. Do either of you guys have any advice on this one?
Yeah, I would say possibly it doesn't matter which data source you use, whether it's Oracle or SQL or Redshift or any others. What you probably need to decide is what's important, because typically with a data model there's three important factors. There's how long does it take to get the data into the model, how big is the model at rest, and query speed. And there are scenarios like if you have a huge amount of data, then perhaps direct query is going to be really important, or you've got a real-time factor or requirement in your report, in which case direct query should win. If query speed's important, then you should absolutely import your data. You'll always get the best query speed performance with import. So it probably boils down to what's the most important thing to your end users and for the reports. If it's real time or the ability to work over a huge amount of data that you don't want to spend time importing, then you would probably opt for direct query. But yeah, if pure out and out query speed's important and you have got the ability to import that data and obviously refresh times and the size of the model, etc., then yeah, I would say import should be your preferred. So this is regardless of whether Oracle's your data source or whatever your data source is.
And the
that would be
Oracle,
my view.
Is the connector for Oracle pretty good, Phil? Because some connection of third-party databases can be less effective or less efficient.
I haven't actually used that in my recent work, so I couldn't comment.
I guess
and actually, sometimes these connectors are owned by the vendor, like Oracle. Sometimes they're actually owned and built by Microsoft. I don't know off the top of my head what the case is for Oracle. I have heard some issues where if you have the Oracle tools like Toad installed, and then you download the Microsoft connector, there's some things you need to download and install, and one will stop working, but the other one, you can't use like both at the same time. I'm sure there's a way you can get it going, but there might be some just fun and games around configuration and INI files or whatever that could be a challenge either. But I would say go import as your first preference if you can fit the data. That'll give you the best query speed. That's typically what your end users care about. But yeah, real time or very, very large data sets, you would probably start to favor direct query. Or you can go composite model, have the best of both worlds and have some tables in import mode and some tables in direct query. So
okay, thanks.
Can I add a couple of things on that? So as Phil said, those are the two main factors, size and frequency. But sometimes I also noticed that when you have security implemented in your database, you want to go with direct query, because when you use import, you just use a service account and that loads everything to your data model. Then you need to implement low-level security or additional layer, which you may already have it in your data. So that's another factor. Sometimes that's very rare occasions that organizations don't want to have anything outside or for the sensitivity of data. They prefer to keep everything, even though that's fully encrypted and everything that we know, but they don't want to take anything to the cloud. They say we want to keep it on-prem in their environment for the sensitivity of data. So they keep it in a direct query.
Yeah, fair enough. I just remembered this. Someone asked this question on my blog in the last few days or last couple of weeks, saying that because I sort of recommend to people that they use the Power BI store version if possible. And Phil, I actually know Phil from Tasmania, he said that he had some problems and so he was having problems with connecting to an Oracle database when using the store version of Power BI. So that's, I did ask Will Thompson about this. He said that he'd done a fair bit of work to try and improve that, but just be aware of that there may be an issue that, but I'd be interested to know how people go with that. Okay, so hopefully that that answers that question. Just one more thing on this is that if you do direct query on any data source, and Phil mentioned this, you always get the best performance inside Power BI, but the queries get generated by Power BI, the service, and sent to the database. And so you need to have a DBA and a tuned database at the back end. Otherwise, because all the work's being done on the source database. So real-time query performance needs to be tuned. And so if you don't have those resources, then, if it's not a proper tuned data warehouse or a database that's designed for taking those types of real-time queries, then direct query is probably not the best approach. All right, so let me see if I can find...
Matt and everyone else, I'm sorry, unfortunately, I've got to drop early.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for joining. So let me go ahead. So let's take this one. What is one thing? This one here. So what's the one thing that everybody should know that most Power BI users don't know? Good, very general question. So Dan, I'm not sure whether you're frozen or I think he's dropped off actually. So it's probably because I've pinned him. So we'll take that out. Okay, so best tip for Power BI. Phil?
Yeah, well, that's a hard one actually. Because I obviously tend to focus very much on data modeling and DAX, but it probably doesn't answer the question perfectly. But I would suggest community.powerbi.com is a fantastic resource. So if you are picking up Power BI for the first time because you've landed a job and someone says, "Hey, you need to figure this product out," then it's a fantastic starting point with such a rich amount of information and things that you can learn, tutorials, examples, lots and lots of questions posted by people in the community, answered by people in the community on how do you do this, how do you do that. So it's a very active, very lively community. So yeah, I don't think it answers it perfectly, but this is probably one of the first things I would recommend someone make sure they familiarize themselves with, so that it'll answer a lot of questions effortlessly. And
okay, so community.powerbi.com, great website, and free support. Also, it's a great way to practice. If you need some practice, come here and answer somebody else's questions. And there's lots of forums there. So thanks, Phil.
Yeah, I certainly use this to get up the learning curve probably a lot faster than I would otherwise would have without this particular site. So,
okay, great. Iman, can you think of a tip that everyone needs to know?
So it's very hard to say one thing, but I would say that's not a tip. It's just for people who come from business background. Power BI is not Excel. So if you want to do things in Power BI, you need to unlearn a lot of things that you did in Excel and do it in a different way. And that includes a lot of data modeling and different skill set that you need to have. Because I see this a lot, and that's actually how we get all this work as a consultant, that people get excited as soon as they can connect to a data source, they build some visuals, they publish it, and that they don't consider a lot of best practices or governance or having things in a proper architecture. So that becomes out of control very quickly, that people need to maintain 200 versions of Power BI, that they may have same logic in many different places or different logic that should be same. So that's one tip that I can say. If you are using Power BI, do it properly and it's not Excel.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. A tip just came in through the chat to say use the themes. So this is a feature here that originally we didn't have themes in Power BI, and you can create your own custom theme which controls the font sizes, the standard settings like whether borders are around your visuals, what size headings do you have. all those settings can be done here in this theme box. And so that came in from one of the people, Adoshi, on the call. So thanks for that suggestion. There's another one that's come in externally saying, learn the external tools. And I think this is a great tip as well. So these are the two big guns. So DAX Studio and Tabular Editor. I've got blog posts on both of those articles. Just go to my website and search for them. And there's intro blog articles on both of those tools. So I think that's also a great tip. My tip is build a star schema. Most important thing that you can do to make your life easy when you go into Power BI is to build a star schema. And for the same reason that Iman said, many people coming into this space come from an Excel background and they don't have a formal database background. Power BI is a database. It's not a spreadsheet. And so you have to apply database techniques. And so the optimum way to model your data is to produce a star schema where you have a transaction table and multiple dimension tables that support that transaction table. This is very simplified. Sometimes you get much more complex data models than this, but wherever possible, if you can write a star schema, all of your DAX problems will become easier. If you try and load all your data in one big flat table, or worse still, if you go to connect to your SQL data source and say import everything, you are in for a world of pain, and I would recommend you don't do that. So that's my...
That's it. Can I just add one more thing, Matt? Just recently, the Italians, Marco Rosso and Alberto Ferri, added a short video on DAX.guide for every single DAX formula or DAX function, which is really good. If you go to DAX.guide, now you can see a short video as well as link to a sample code in DAX.do, which is a web-based environment. You can write your own DAX and play around with some sample data. That is a fantastic environment to learn DAX.
So come here, find your article. There's a short video, tells you where it's being used. There's some sample code. And then the other one Iman was talking about is DAX.do. And this is brand new, but this is DAX as a query language. So you can come in here and write a DAX query, say evaluate customer, and you can run that query and test that query straight through a browser without having to have a tool like DAX Studio installed. So yeah, they're the tips from Iman. Thanks for that, Iman. All right, so let's keep up with the votes. So I noticed it, so I'm going to take this one here from Mike. It's currently Ignite. So that's this one here. There's currently an Ignite challenge that allows you to qualify. Oh, which could be used. Could you talk to that? I don't know anything about this. Do you know, Phil, did you go to Ignite? Do you know anything about this Ignite challenge?
I did some things for Ignite, but this is the first I've heard of the challenge. It sounds pretty cool. And if you can use it for DA100, then that would be awesome. Is the question asking, can I use it for DA100 or?
Okay, well, it looks like, I think it can, it's saying it can be. I'm just wondering if it's only one free exam. So you'd have to be pretty sharp. I tell you what, there's some pretty good people out there. I've personally entered some events before, and there's just some smackingly awesome people out there that enter these comps. Now, I'm not trying to discourage you, but you just keep that in mind with the amount of effort. So I'm sorry, Mike, I don't really know too much about that one. So yeah.
Good luck if you do enter.
I asked this question, so we may as well ask you, Phil. So, and you did give me an answer just before the call, but so what's your perspective on what's happened with desktop? Because it looks like we're running a bit late.
Sure. No, I mean, it normally tends to come out fairly early each month, usually around the after the first week of each month. But we don't guarantee an SLA. So what can affect that is if our testing picks up issues that just needs further work. I did see some internal comms come out yesterday saying, hey, look, we are going to have to postpone. We were expecting to publish yesterday, but we did find something that we need to work on. So, but I didn't see what the expected release date is. And I think you would far rather make sure that, we deliver something that's going to be good quality.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's not too long.
Yeah. So the process, Phil, is that they build the release package or the release candidate, and then they regression test it through a period. And sometimes they find more bugs than they were hoping for, and they physically not ready to release it, right? And so they just have to push back the release date.
Yeah, it's a very sophisticated process. We call them trains. Like, we can already see the train for April and probably May already now. But obviously, if you start playing around with the May edition, you're getting the very early cut of the whatever changes they've made to that. And, there's a much higher risk that those changes have got issues, or what we call regressions. So there are layers and layers and layers of testing. We expose to Microsoft employees probably about 3 or 4 weeks out from it being released to the public. So quite often, just being an employee, you might use it and find some issues and report back, and they might decide to just hold the release date back a little bit. So that's why you find that it's not it's a guaranteed day each month. So if it is a little bit late, probably means it's maybe a bigger release and we've found a few issues. But hopefully we do a good job at fixing them.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I actually personally thought the last release was a little bit flaky, actually. So maybe they're just being a little bit extra cautious now because of that. And we've got a good other flaky question, which I might pull up.
It does hit us. Like if we have to deal with a lot more support calls, it's expensive to mop up. So it's in our interest to make sure we get it right. So yeah, you could be right, Matt.
Yeah. So sort of more comment, I guess, here from Christian. Is this something that we could talk about in a session? So it's a very complex topic. I do have an article, Christian. I don't know if you know that. And the Italians are always a good go-to source on this topic, but it is complex. But if you go to my website and have a look at search for expanded tables, it's this article here, many-to-many relationships. And so this is my explanation of many-to-many relationships. And then right down towards the end, there's a section on expanded tables here. So where I talk about the concept and how it works. But it's also covered in the definitive guide to DAX. It was in the original version. I haven't got the updated version. I got to admit, I got a little bit confused when I read the original version, but I know Marco and Roberto have put a lot of work into improving the way they communicate that. So we might have to take that under advisement as to whether I could turn that into a talk at some stage.
There's actually an original document or a blog post by Jeffrey Wang when he was originally blogging for a short period on expanded tables. That can be quite an interesting one to read as well. So if you do a search for Jeffrey Wang and expanded tables, you should probably find his version of explaining expanded tables. And, you would have to almost take that as gospel.
Yeah. So if you don't know, Jeffrey is the father of the DAX language, as we call him. And he denies that, but we call him the father anyway. So this looks like his blog. I just searched for Jeffrey Wang. I actually listened to Lars Schreiber's podcast. If you haven't listened to Lars's podcast, so SSBI podcast. Lars was one of the first to get started with podcasts, and it seems to be pretty popular now. So, I mean, Guy in a Cube's been doing interviews for a while. Seeing Matthew Roach has started to do a bit of stuff, and Casper's got a blog going, a podcast going now. Lars has been doing this for a while. So I was just listening to the Jeffrey Wang podcast just before this call, actually. And so he's got a few interesting people here. And they talked about Jeffrey's blog. And Jeffrey said that the reason he stopped blogging now is that early on, there wasn't a lot of penetration of this stuff. And so he was using it as a way of explaining to the community. And now what he finds is that he releases something into the service, doesn't announce it, the UI isn't updated, doesn't document it, and someone's already got a blog article up within 2 days that explains how it works. And so he finds that the community is doing just as good a job at communicating this stuff now. Anyway, so on top of Phil's comment about Jeffrey's blog, have a look at Lars's podcast. Rob Colley's got one as well called Raw Data. So if you search for Raw Data, Rob Colley, I mean, there's I don't know about you, but I work full time in Power BI, and so sometimes when my day is done and I'm had dinner and perhaps I'm unwinding, thinking about going to bed, the last thing I want to do is listen to another podcast on DAX. But if you do something else full time, then this might be something that you enjoy, or when you're driving along in the car, it's just a great, I'm sure you understand about podcasts. So, okay, so there's, so I'll have to take that under advisement. Christian, you've got my email address. So if you send me an email so I don't have to make a note, I'll give that some consideration, but no promises. Phil, do you want to talk about this one? The AAD failure yesterday. I don't know about anyone else, but I had one of the worst days of my life yesterday, and it started with this AAD failure. I mean, I'm sure people were scrambling at Microsoft, but I got to tell you, the flow-on effect that it had to me personally, Microsoft couldn't pay me the amount of money for the pain and suffering that caused me yesterday. But any insights from you, Phil?
We can sue Microsoft, Matt. We can sue.
sue them.
No. Yeah, no. I did hear a term earlier today that I hadn't heard before, that it was a Sev 0 incident. I've heard Sev 1 and Sev 2, but this is the first time I've heard of a Sev 0, which is a global issue.
Zero, right? So everyone stop everything and fix it.
Yeah. Obviously, someone tripped over the wrong cable at the wrong time. I mean, I know, like any organization, you absolutely try your best to, never make a mistake and put in, lots of layers of checking, and unfortunately something went wrong here. And from what I gather, it probably was quite a small issue that meant, it had a big impact. I don't have the full, what do they usually have after these incidents where they do the
wake,
or the wake, or there's typically a word for it where you sort of deconstruct or decompose and try and else. I'm sure that will be going on for quite a while, and what could have been done different. But it affected us. It was a real pain in the backside for us at Microsoft too, like with everyone. So we absolutely feel your pain.
Yeah.
All I can hope for is that the exact issue wouldn't happen again, and anything close or close to resembling that will happen again. I know that we treat encryption and security incredibly importantly. So some of these keys, if you just get them wrong, or you do something wrong with the keys, and you can lock yourself out of some fairly important systems. So it was a bad day all round.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we obviously, the world is just moving online, and we're relying on these software as a service providers, and but it doesn't happen very often. It was painful for everyone. I think it was probably only half a day in reality by the time it sort of patches and stuff rolled out, or they rolled it back. So in the big scheme of things, to me, it's still worth going into this online world. If you compare, I don't even know if you remember the days, it wasn't that long ago when you had Excel 2010 installed on your PC in the middle of 2016 because of the old processes of having to have IT go and do the upgrade processes and do all the testing and stuff. And so we've sort of moved away from that now. I know some companies still hold on to those processes, and maybe it's valid, maybe it's not. But I think we're in a better place, even with the occasional faux pas. So. Okay, so and Phil, sorry to make you talk. I don't know if this is one for you. This is probably a bigger question, but how to handle the daylight savings. Was it you that said that you thought there was an API or something? Or
no, I mean, sadly, there's no quick fix because every country handles daylight savings differently, and they change it all the time. I know here in New Zealand, the dates that daylight savings starts and changes, the pattern changes fairly regularly. So generally the answer is answers that I've seen that work successfully, you just have a daylight savings table where you can have a couple of columns when daylight savings starts, daylight savings finishes, and then on the fly you can apply that calculation either as a measure or build it into the logic, your ETL logic, so it makes the adjustments using multiple columns. You could have a UTC column for your fact, but a local time column for your fact as well that takes into account daylight savings. But I don't think you'll see a DAX function natively that you can just wrap around to say apply daylight savings, because underneath the covers we will need to know, store and understand how every single locality treats daylight savings and constantly update that. So I think unfortunately that means it's sort of up to the individual to be aware of who the end users are and where they are going to be accessing the model of the report, and make sure they code for that.
Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense. So a master data table with your start and end date for your daylight savings. That sounds like a good idea, Phil. As far as for whatever reason, IntelliSense is not working for me in Power Query, and I'm not that good at Power Query. But so there's this function date time local now. This is going to return the time from my local PC. But of course, once we publish this online, it gets switched out to UTC. So I think there's a UTC now. IntelliSense is not working, but I don't know, Phil, if you know. I'm
terrible at
I'd have to get IntelliSense working. So there is a function something like this. And then, so what I've done when I've deployed it for another client, luckily they were in Brisbane, so I use UTC to get, because it's on the server, and then I manually add the 10 hours, which is Brisbane, and because they don't have daylight savings, it's actually very easy. So you add it with a hash duration, and then it's days, hours, minutes, seconds, I think. So 0, 10, 0, 0. So if I put this as local now, because that one does work. So this part of the code adds 10 hours. So whatever the correct language is for the UTC one, plus this, which is the hard coded. And then what you could do is, using Phil's technique, you could load your adjustments for the different time periods, extract that in Power Query, insert that in here, so that depending on the day of the refresh, it either adds 10 hours or 11 hours if you've got a time shift. It's definitely more difficult if you are trying to solve this for people in different regions. So I think basically you're in one time zone, and you'd have to use that measure technique that I mentioned before, I think.
There are good blog posts by Ken Pauls, Welzerard, and Chris Webb on this topic.
Okay.
But I also agree that, this is something that is a common requirement. So I was hoping that there's something like as simple as a DAX or M function to fix it, but I get what Phil said, and it may be not that easy to maintain that time zone for every locale, but yes.
Yeah. Iman, did we have I'm not sure that I was clear on what time we were going to wrap up. What's your...
We said we normally finish before 7, so we still have 20 minutes, but
okay. I mean,
depends
Phil,
on how...
have you got a few more minutes, Phil?
Cool. I'm happy. I actually thought this ran for till 7:30 your time.
So I think we'll wrap up at 7, so that everyone can have some of their evening
Should
back.
ask the audience if they are still happy to stay.
Well, they can stay and talk amongst themselves, but so I'd certainly like to wrap up around 7. So, all right. So let's have a look at this 3 vote thing. I quite like this pigeonhole. So, what additional visualizations would you like to see added to out-of-the-box visuals for anyone? So, Iman, you're in a lot of businesses dealing with people. You gave us your feedback before about the custom visuals and the warnings. Any? Yeah,
I think nothing on top of my head, because we either use like a standard out-of-the-box or some of those custom visuals, or we build our own. But certainly there are some areas that we think that would be better in the existing out-of-the-box custom out-of-the-box visuals that can be enhanced. I need to think about it. Maybe Phil, you can answer.
I've got a couple.
Yeah,
I'd like to see a native Gantt chart and a native Venn diagram. They would be probably two quite good visuals to complement the built-in custom visuals. And this is coming from a guy who has said a couple of times already, I'm the last person to ask about visuals and design, but I think they would probably be two quite useful visuals in the native suite.
Yeah, I agree. The one that I would have said, but it's really been solved, and that's this small multiples. So I'm not sure whether people saw this one come through, but this has long been an issue. I noticed Jeff was on the call earlier on. I don't know whether he's on the call.
He was probably fishing for spark lines.
Yeah. So, Jeff's probably on the spark lines. So, so this concept of a small multiple. So I've got a subcategory chart. I think this will work if I was to bring small multiples on, say, category, then it should blow that into 4 separate charts. Well, there's actually only 3 categories with sales. And so you get this proportionate version of each of the charts. Probably not a great example given the sales variation by category, because, bikes are such a big category. So,
yeah. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to play with the Charticulator tool to generate your own visuals, but I wouldn't be too surprised to see that pop up as a visual inside Power BI Desktop this year.
I wouldn't be surprised either. Yeah, it's a great tool, and so anyway, hopefully that's a little bit of insight into that question. So let's answer that one. What else have we got? Does anyone experience SAP? Once again, Phil or Iman, you guys are dealing with the corporates, so.
Yes, so I can start, and Phil, you can add to that. As you know, there are some connections available to SAP, like SAP BW. You can either do direct query or you can go with import. What we normally do is to do import, even though we may lose a lot of functionalities like the security that is built in SAP, you may lose when you do import, but that's fine because you can replicate it inside Power BI with row level security and using the same security tables that can be loaded from SAP BW. The only thing that I noticed is that with direct query, obviously there are some limitations and there's some performance impact, but when we do import, we have to redo a lot of those, things that are already in BW. So which one is better? I think it always depends, but import usually gives us better flexibility and better control in Power BI, even though we may have to redo some of those items that I mentioned, like row-level security and measures and calculation inside Power BI.
So Iman, anything specifically on hunting through SAP? So you mentioned BW. So
yeah, that's exactly for BW. So the things that I mentioned were specifically for SAP BW, but
and then what if you've got ECC or something like that? You can still connect directly, right? There is a native ECC connector, but I think this question then goes on to, how do you find the data that's not readily accessible? My tip on that would be find a good SAP ECC developer who understands the table structures. I mean, the reality is BW was introduced to make it easier to get hold of that data, right? And so, but not everyone has probably got BW installed.
Yep.
And nothing's cheap when it comes to SAP, as I'm sure the SAP people would know. All right, so quick answer on that one. So this one's come up as 3, so let's have a look at that one. Yes, so I was just reading this one. So you've got a sales and a finance workspace. How do you create a single app that includes reports from the 2 workspaces? Or in other words, how do you solve that problem? Now, anyone, Iman or Phil, have you seen this in the past?
I've been asking for this for a while. I know that you can do some workarounds, but I would love to
one
see
app, one workspace is the current approach.
Yeah, I would love to see one-to-many instead of one-to-one mapping between workspace and apps. So
ideas.powerbi.com, find the idea and vote for it. I guess one option would be to create a new workspace and load both of the reports into the one workspace. I mean, a workspace is really designed to do that. So you can load 2 Power BI data models or 2 reports, 2 PBIX files into the one workspace, and then publish a single app from that. Now, it could be that this new workspace actually doesn't physically have a copy of the files. You could create a thin workbook, points to the finance workspace, a second thin workbook that points to the sales workspace, load those 2 workbooks into a third workspace, and so it inherits and references back to the other workspaces, and then publish that as an app. So that might be worth a try. I don't know if you've seen that, Phil, deployed anywhere similar to that.
I haven't, but yeah.
At least conceptually, it sounds like it might work.
Yeah.
So hopefully you know what I mean by a thin workbook. So you go into Power BI Desktop and you go to Get Data, and you get data from a Power BI data set. So basically you build a new set of reports, but you're doing almost like a live connection to a Power BI data set that's previously been published. Then when you save your workbook's going to be tiny, 50 kilobytes, because it doesn't have its own data model. It's referencing the one in this second workspace. And then I think you can move forward from there. So that would be my suggestion.
So Phil, sorry, because that's also my question. Do you think there will be any enhancement in next version of workspaces and apps to have this flexibility to publish to different apps from same workspace?
I think it's quite high up on ideas.powerbi.com, but it's also something that's often requested from our enterprise customers. So the team that look after this are very aware of this. I can't speak for them in terms of any likely change, in the short or medium term, but I think they are looking at it very hard and sizing up the options, because usually what you really want to do, the perfect solution, quite often involves a huge amount of work, and if you do that, then you're sacrificing a whole bunch of other things. So I know that there have been some conversations around another popular one that kind of fits in the same area as the idea of subfolders inside workspaces as well, and having different ability to set security within a workspace. So being able to say, okay, I want to add 100 people to my workspace, and 99 of them can see everything, but one of them can't see, or see a bit more, or see a bit less, or something. So it's bubbling away, but I haven't seen anything definitive or anything in the super short term. I know it's a non-answer, but it's a live topic. Absolutely.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Phil. All right, this next question I might have a crack at, and then I'll see if anyone else has got something to say. So, is there a reference or a source for DAX error messages? So I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with DAX error messages. Some of them are very hard to understand, and some of them are not so bad. But my advice to you on DAX error messages, and this is going to sound trite, but my advice is read the message. And so many times people ask me for help with DAX problems, and if you read the message, the answer is given to you in the message. So it's not always the best English. It's not always easy to understand, but they usually do contain the information that you need. Now, I know that there was, and part of the problem with the DAX language is over time you learn certain things that trigger errors, and then the developers go and fix those things that trigger errors, or fix is the wrong word, but they enhance the product to be more robust so that that error isn't triggered. And you try and do it in a demo on the fly, and you can't generate the error. And yeah, you look a little bit crazy. But if I was to write a measure,
compare a string with a value, a string with a number.
Yeah. So the what value? Sorry.
Compare just a string with a number.
So like
just +1.
Well, okay.
Although this potentially might just concatenate it and you get a new string called
well, like I
test
said,
one.
some of these things. So, I mean, I think if, you know, if it's true, then test. Now, this is almost what Daniel did. So I know this used to throw an error because you weren't allowed to have two different data types. And so this is something that one of those examples where something's changed. So I'm pretty confident that that used to throw an error message because it wouldn't let you have two different data types. Now, and sometimes they will throw error messages when they're in one use case and not in other use cases. The other thing is that it can be very hard to, so let's try and do this. I won't put a comma in, so hopefully we'll get an error message this time. Sometimes it can be, okay, let's have a look at this. So the incorrect syntax to one, DAX true, yeah. So in this case, the message is not very useful. So look, my first tip is read the message. Often the clue is in the message. The other thing that I would say is go to daxformatter.com. I'm sure many of you know about this, but you know, not everyone knows everything. So there's a website called DAX Formatter developed by Marco and Alberto. And this does what the software suggests. It formats your DAX. But there's a bonus in that if you have, so let me show you format the DAX first. So if I format that, oh God, if true, and so there you go, that goes, maybe it's because measure is a reserved word. Let's see why. There's no, okay, so it must be that it's picked up measure as being a reserved word. That would be my guess. But there's some formatting. And now there is a bonus that if you make a mistake in your code and you can't work out where it is, so if I try and format that, sometimes DAX Formatter will give you a visual indicator at the point where it finds a character that it was not expecting. And so in this case, it's got to this comma and it wasn't expecting a comma. And so sometimes just knowing the position in your formula of where the error is occurring can be enough. And it's normally a bracket matching type of thing. And so that's exactly what the case is here. So I'm missing a bracket here. You can add it and then format it again. So this is not explicitly answering your question, how do you read DAX error messages? But if you're getting DAX errors, this is actually one of the first things I'll do. Number one, I'll read the message. If I can't work it out, if I've got a long measure, I'll dump it in here and hit format and see whether that helps me. Marco told me that this product was never designed to be a debugging tool, but orders of magnitude, 40% of all of their queries, something like that, have errors in them. And so clearly people do use this tool as a debugging tool. So any other suggestions from the other guys? No?
Depends how advanced you want to get. I mean, DAX Studio as an external tool is a really good way to sort of drill down into and isolate and zero in on a particular issue and more complicated DAX.
Yeah. So sometimes you have problems that are not errors, right? You're not getting the answer that you want. Perhaps further to that, and I've given a couple of blog articles today, but maybe just another one. I wrote an article not that long ago. Just let me have a quick look here. This one here, debugging DAX with tooltips. So this is just an idea I had. I was helping someone with a very complex DAX formula with lots of filter tests that were going on, and it's got this switch statement with certain conditions have to be true. And I was trying to debug it, and so I had a table like this, and I'm trying to work out what's going on. So, for example, what's happening in this cell? And so what I did was I created a tooltip that had all the inputs. So these are the input variables. I wrote measures for the input variables. I put the DAX formula here, and now I could hover over any data point on my visual, and this table updates showing me the changing values of the inputs. And so then I could say, I could work my way through the actual formula and debug it there. So this would be a tip on how you can debug a formula that is not throwing an error message, but is causing you some grief and you're trying to work out what's wrong. So you can have a look at that if you're interested. Okay, let's see how we're going. So maybe we've got time for one more question, and then we'll wrap. And there's quite a few questions here still, so I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them.
Just save them for next time.
Yeah, so we would maybe I might just sort of leave it there anyway, but and just say, look, there's still 39 people on the call, which is fantastic. So I'd love to hear from you, Iman, and I would love to hear from you if you think this has been a useful a format. Has this been worth your while? I mean, we go by the numbers, so if people attend and people stay, then we usually think that there's been some value. But you can drop us a line, you can make a comment on our Meetup page if you thought it was a useful format, and maybe we could do it again, and get some different people to come in. So look, with that, I might wrap up. Any final things from you, Iman?
No, I think that's all good. I was just checking to see if we have decided about our next meetup. I believe that's not.
We don't have a date yet. We've got Easter. We've got Easter in the start of April. So we'd probably be a similar date this time in April, I guess. It's probably the 16th or something. I'm not really sure on the date. But we were hoping to get that one live, as I said, but it sounds like, Iman, that's not going to happen.
If we get another venue, which is still something we're looking for, chances are that we can do face-to-face, but it won't be Microsoft Reactor. It will be somewhere else if we can find a proper place with such.
That doesn't cost a bomb.
But the problem is that there's a limitation. Like even if you get a proper size venue, you can only have maybe 30, 40 people.
Right. You're allowed to stand up at the bar and drink now. So who knows? Anything's possible by middle of April. So good. All right, everyone. Well, look, thanks very much for joining. Thanks for your interest. Thanks for your great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer every single question. But yeah, thanks again, and look forward to seeing some of you again. And thanks, Phil, for joining late in the evening, your time, and for your insights and wisdom.
No worries. Hopefully next time I'll be over there in person. And, I might even bring a photo of the Bledisloe Cup or the America's Cup so you guys can actually see what they look like.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Phil. All right, guys. Thank you, guys and girls. See you all. Bye.
No worries.